All right, so I want to talk about T.I. because lately he's been on a roll. So first of all, he exposed Candace Owens for the fraud and political hack that she is. And on top of that, he recently appeared on The View and he had a really astute political analysis. So he talked about the 2020 election and who he believes is the candidate who is best suited to beat Donald Trump. And this clip shows me that more so than most celebrities, he really does seem to have his finger on the pulse of America. And I've got to share it with you because what he says here, not only is it correct, but it's something that the audience of The View desperately needs to hear because they usually don't really get that great of political analyses there. But T.I. said something that made a lot of sense, I think, and he broke it down in a way that I hope will resonate with their audience. Now, I'm not going to take this as an endorsement of the candidate he's going to talk about. Nonetheless, what he says, spot on.
So who do you like now?
I mean, for me, it's anybody but Trump 2020.
Okay.
That's what we said.
Yeah. Anyone but Trump.
Yeah,
We say any functioning adult.
yeah, anyone who's fair and decent and, not an international embarrassment.
Yeah.
But if I may just go a little further, is there anyone you think who could actually beat him, really?
Right now, I think that the only person that I see who has a base that's strong enough to oppose him is Bernie.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
He's not, Biden has gotten bigger numbers, but at the moment.
Biden's got big, but I think
Yeah.
that Bernie's base is more passionate. I think they're more passionate.
That's true.
And I think that, he's the complete antithesis of what Trump represents.
Yes, that's true, too.
Yeah, but I think he's going to have a strong vice president, because a lot of people see that his age and his health as a factor. So I think a strong vice president could relieve some of the doubt that exists.
Maybe Amy Klobuchar.
Perhaps. Or Andrew Gillum.
Oh, you like Gillum.
Yeah, I do.
Andrew Gillum, oh yeah.
So that was great. Now, it doesn't necessarily seem like he's willing to just straight up endorse Bernie Sanders, but consider this, T.I., if you're watching, which he's not, but if you were to see this. He said that in terms of who he's supporting, quote, it's anybody but Trump. Yet, simultaneously, he thinks that Bernie Sanders is the only one with the base strong enough to oppose Trump, and that Bernie is the antithesis of Donald Trump. So if you put these two things together, then all signs point to Bernie as the best bet. So why not just make it official? Why not just endorse him? You can perform at Bernie's rallies. There'd be a lot of excitement. Why not? If you want to defeat Donald Trump, I mean, you have a large platform. A lot of people respect you. Endorse Bernie. But, not to get too far into that, what he says is great. So he talks about how Bernie Sanders has the base to oppose Donald Trump. That is absolutely true. And what's important about Bernie Sanders is he's pursuing a strategy that other Democrats haven't pursued in quite some time. Democrats have been wiped out because what they've been trying to do is they go after moderate and Republican voters, right? They visualize the electorate as this fixed block of people who are in the center, who are always undecided, who they have to win over. And they win them over by going to the right. But what Bernie Sanders is doing is he's trying to excite the base because he realizes that in shifting to the right to court moderate voters, the Democratic Party has left this space wide open from the left, and the left feels abandoned. They feel like they don't actually have a party that represents them. So what has happened? People have stayed home. But with Bernie Sanders, he actually is doing everything he can to get out non-voters, people who don't usually participate in politics. I mean, I've shared this anecdote before in the program, but my mom, she's in her 60s. She has never voted her entire life, not once, although there's one candidate in 2016 that got her to register to vote. Bernie Sanders. No other candidate has demonstrated to her that they're actually going to fight because her view was, look, these people, they get in office after promising everything and then they sell us out, and it's just, she felt like it was worthless, right? And we live in the state of Oregon where voting is easy, but that's how disenfranchised she felt. That's how disenchanted millions of people across the country feel with the system. So rather than courting Republicans and undecided voters, what Bernie Sanders is doing is he's trying to excite the base that exists, knowing that Democrats win if they get their base to turn out. Because when voter turnout is high, when young voters show up, Republicans lose. Period. T.I. recognizes that. And that's what's really important. Now, I don't agree with everything. So, Joy Behar pointed out that, Biden's got bigger numbers. And I think that T.I. made a phenomenal point that Bernie's base is more passionate. But on top of that, I would argue that Hillary's base, or Hillary's numbers, was comparable at this point in time in the race. She was beating Donald Trump in head-to-head matchups. Biden, can you imagine, what's going to happen if Biden is the nominee? That will suppress the base. Democratic Party voters will not be enthusiastic about voting for Joe Biden. Young voters will not want to come out and vote for Joe Biden. So in the event Joe Biden is the nominee, I would predict that Donald Trump would be the favorite. It's not a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden would lose, because I think that if Obama came out and started to really campaign for Joe Biden and Joe Biden was just hidden away, that could make a difference theoretically, but I'm not so sure. I think that Joe Biden is the worst case scenario. If he's the nominee, Trump has a great shot at getting reelected. So looking at the numbers now, sure, I think that that's useful to an extent, but you have to understand what facilitates electoral victories for Republicans. It's when the Democrats stay home. Nobody's going to be excited to vote for someone like Joe Biden, who is just another neoliberal who isn't really offering anything to voters. Now, T.I. then goes on to make another strong point about how Bernie Sanders should pick a really strong VP to kind of ameliorate the concerns that voters have about his health and his age. And I do think that that's a solid point. But Joy Behar then chimes in with a really weird recommendation. She says, like Amy Klobuchar. I mean, what is it with centrists and Amy Klobuchar? She's polling at 1%. You want to excite the base, right? You know this, right? She's polling at 1%. And then Bill Maher said the same thing. I'm looking closely at Amy Klobuchar. She's polling at 1%. Why do you think she's a good option? I mean, it's painful, right? These elites are so out of touch, and they just hear themselves talk, and they never listen to any views that contradict their own. They never hear counter arguments. So they just rich-splain, and they give Democrats bad advice, and it's so frustrating. Amy Klobuchar is polling at 1%. Nobody wants her to be the VP. Nobody wants her to be the president. She's not politically viable. She's not electable. Stop. But T.I. didn't have the best option. He did float Andrew Gillum, and that's someone who Elizabeth Warren is actually reportedly looking at. Andrew Gillum, I definitely supported him over Ron DeSantis, obviously, in 2018 in Florida. And I will say this. When it comes to electability, I do think that Andrew Gillum is a good debater. I think he's a good campaigner, although ideologically speaking, he's not as good as Bernie Sanders. So I think that Bernie Sanders needs to make sure that he doesn't undercut his populist appeal by selecting someone who would potentially, be co-opted by the establishment. And in the general election, there were some signs that Andrew Gillum, was starting to move away from his progressive ideals. He did the pivot, as strategists would say. But if I'm Bernie Sanders, I think that, there's more than enough qualified women to where I would choose a female VP if I'm Bernie Sanders. And he already kind of hinted that that's what he's looking at. But really, even though my first choice, individually speaking, would be Nina Turner, obviously, if I'm Bernie Sanders, I think the smartest choice for me to win would be to pick Elizabeth Warren, because strategically, you have to understand that Elizabeth Warren, she has the support of Hillary and Kamala supporters. Democratic Party loyalists, for whatever reason, they really love Elizabeth Warren. So I think in order to unite the party going into the general, you pick someone who simultaneously can bring in centrists who are skeptical, but who your own base wouldn't feel as if you are sacrificing ideological principles. And that person, I think, would be Elizabeth Warren. But I mean, there's a number of phenomenal options. There's Pramila Jayapal, Barbara Lee, Zephyr Teachout, Nina Turner, of course. Nina Turner is my number one. She always will be my number one choice. In fact, I think I support her more than Bernie Sanders. But with that being said, Andrew Gillum's probably not the best choice. But everything else, I don't want to discount what T.I. said there. His political analysis was actually pretty astute, pretty spot on for a celebrity, for someone who's rich, who you'd kind of expect to be out of touch. So, what he's saying is great. I just wish he didn't make it official and just endorse Bernie Sanders. We know you want to, T.I. I don't know why you're not. But Bernie is the one best chance we have at defeating Donald Trump. I think that Elizabeth Warren has a solid chance, but she's not as sure of a bet as Bernie Sanders would be. Bernie Sanders isn't a foregone conclusion. I think that he could lose to Donald Trump, but I think that in terms of just his chances, he'd have a 75% chance of beating Donald Trump just based now where we are. So T.I. is right, and if you want to beat Trump, Bernie's your ticket.